Welcome, and thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. I know already that your speaking schedule and other commitments are very hectic, so thank you for giving us a bit of your time today.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Canadian Women for Afghan Women is an organization that does great work, and I've been,
Mm.
seeing their work on the ground and know their colleagues there. So I would be very much, honored to be able to speak to their members and colleagues about their work and the overall women's situation in Afghanistan.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, we've been in place for about 20 years, and we started out with a real focus on advocacy, actually, in that time. And we've done a lot of work in between around education programming for adults, yeah, women, and girls. We have a school, we have a number of programs. And now we're finding ourselves, Wajma, circling back
Mm.
and we are reallocating funds and human resources to support the advocacy efforts, both internationally and in Afghanistan. So our symposium's theme, it was last year, the theme was Never Go Back. And this year, the theme is Never Go Back again, because of this year being even more important. So we're really wanting to support you and women's organizations in Afghanistan in terms of how to best leverage collective support in terms of contributing to the peace negotiations and beyond and beyond. So we'd like to talk a little bit about your perception of the peace negotiations. But before that, maybe you could give us a little bit of a background on you and on your story. And you have a very accomplished past. And I think the work that you're doing now is also very interesting. So we'd love to hear about your story.
Sure, thank you. Well, as many other Afghan women growing up in Afghanistan during the actually before the civil war, so we had to leave Afghanistan just on the outset of the civil war when the Soviet Union was you know, defeated and they were withdrawing from Afghanistan. Very similar kind of, situation where the world, abandoned Afghanistan, and many of those who fought the Soviet Union, invasion, they were left out with so much arms and so much ammunition, and they started really killing each other and so many other people on the ground. So we left Afghanistan during those times, and I must have been an 11, 12-year-old girl, and we went to Pakistan. So my life very much starts actually from those times when I started working, as a refugee child, in the camps, and seeing how very, very small opportunities of being able to learn a letter was a luxury for a young, small child, a refugee child. And that's where actually I started at a very young age. Almost I was 13 years of age when I was teaching 30 other kids in their camps. And that's where, I started becoming more aware and sensitive to what's going on around me, and engaged in more kind of, support programs for the refugees. And eventually I ended up, working with MSF at that time. And this was 1999 and 2000, when I was working in refugee camps where, huge, and I can never forget those days when there was huge money that was going to the camps, but women and children had the highest number of malaria and leishmaniasis. And they didn't know why it's happening. And we found out that, a lot of support actually goes to the men who sell it outside the tents, and it doesn't even reach to the women and children. And from there, I became, an advocate, and used all those real life experiences to advocate for refugee rights. And eventually we came to Afghanistan in 2001. And during the Taliban, I used to work with Afghan Aid, which is a charity organization, and there as well. So we had many programs under the name of kitchen gardening for women in different parts of Afghanistan. And I also remember the days where we would help women learn, letters by writing in the mud with small sticks, And when the Taliban would come, for example, the kids would tell us, oh, somebody's coming, then we would actually use with our hand and destroy it so that they don't see. We were not even having access to paper and a pen, for example. So remembering those days, and I came back to Kabul in December 2001, and that's when a new era started for a lot of us. We worked very hard with the government at that time, the transitional government, for the first constitution. I remember, December 2002, 2001, 2002, 3, where we went around the whole country and we brought people together, deciding that things have to change. The Taliban are gone. We need to put our, all these dreams that we have for our children and for our country into a state, into a system. And that's when we, worked very hard and got gender equality in the first constitution of 2004. And those were like, and those days seem like golden eras to me, because I was very young at that time, and I, like, almost 20 years ago, and there was a lot of ambition and a lot of passion all of us were working with, and of course the security was much better than what we have today, and easy access to different provinces. Like, I would go around, sit under the trees with people and interact, and then things started getting better for women. We got the Ministry of Women's Affairs. We started working on a very important law, which I very much take pride in being part of that process and being able to actually bring that law into the lives of Afghan women, which is the Elimination of Violence against Women law. For the first time in the history of the country, we were able to criminalize any violence against women. So what used to happen and continues to happen inside homes started being a public issue. And it was, of course, not easy. It was a social kind of a cultural change for people as well. Many women started coming up. Many of women who were victims and survivors of violence started using the law. So that was another, huge important accomplishment for us. Meanwhile, what things started getting worse was the after 2009 and 10, when the insurgency continued to take more space of, public and take more tolls on human lives. And that kind of started, taking us a lot back in terms of our accomplishments, and also what we need to do. And that's when we, as a community and as a nation, a lot of us went forward. My organization at that time, it was 2010, when we worked together with another 50 organizations as part of the Afghan Women's Network, where we said, we need to have a reconciliation process, because what also happened is that we had just emerged from a civil war, and there is a lot of, grievances in the younger people. People are taking up arms, and we need to deal with it. So I remember having very much worked hard with women's network and women's groups. For example, we were able to come up with the first national peace and reintegration program in 2010, and my focus started more on the women in peace and security. So after I went to law school in 2010, and I came back in 2011, and I started actually, a local organization that dealt with issues of women, peace and security. And it was very new for a lot of people. Even when we took it to the Ministry of Economy to register it as an organization, because it had the name of peace and security, they said, we cannot even register you. Like, what do women, peace and security have in common? And from there, like our work, we identified a number of local, leaders. So I started working with 30 women in 34 provinces. Today, that network has reached to 200 women. We continue to provide them, with platforms of skills. They have learned how to resolve conflicts, for example, without resorting to violence. What happens in most of the rural areas where the government that has little access or no access or no existence, family courts are not there, other government formal justice system is not there, so people decide on their own conflicts. So what happens is that if there is, for example, a conflict on water, then people start actually killing each other. And we have been able to provide to create these local peace building initiatives where communities started seeing that things can actually be divided. So one of our very interesting programs of conflict resolution cases we did in one of the district was that they divided the number of days that each village would use from that water. A lot of people had been killed on that, using that stream. And then after almost 6-7 months of consultation and using, women using their access into the families, the wife of the malik, the wife of the religious, cleric started, doing her lobby inside homes and trying to, make her husband more kind of, calm down and say like, we can actually agree that in a week of 7 days, for example, 4 days one village would use it, 3 days another village would use it. In the days that if there was an emergency by the villages that whose term was not to use the water, then still there was one contact group that we established who would help. So we created these communication mechanisms in communities where people had been using a lot of violence to resolve their disputes. And that's what I want very much to bring into the national process. So that's what I've been, very much advocating, that peace cannot be just a political practice, just cannot be dividing, power between actors who are trying to rule with using every means. But peace has to be, a social reality for common people as well, where people can start, sending their children to school safely, where they can actually, have a government court that can decide on their disputes, that can provide them with the basic access. So that's and then of course right now what I'm doing is, as part of our huge network of women organizations and activists, we are doing a lot of international level advocacy. The Afghan Women Will Never Go Back campaign is a very important part of our work right now, where we have reached out to like a lot of women leaders globally and trying to raise our voices, of course, locally. So my organization, WPSO, is also doing a national level monitoring of the process, where we are, doing a lot of lobby and advocacy, not just on women's inclusion, because as a woman, I don't need to just focus on women, but overall how this process is going to, create peace, real peace for Afghan people.
Wow, my goodness, Wazhma. That is quite a story. And I think you've just begun. This is my feeling. You've just begun in terms of this work. And I loved your description of the golden era. And how can we, through these peace negotiations, get back to that place, that safe place where people feel they can send their girls and boys to school safely. They feel that every day where they live, it's safe. So, with all of that in mind and all of your experiences in mind, what is your sense of these peace negotiations? Do you feel where do you feel more optimistic or more pessimistic regarding the current state of the peace process? What's your thoughts?
I'm trying to be realistic in a way that this war has to end in a
Hmm.
peaceful way, in a way that the insurgency, or no matter, of course it has a huge political aspect of it, regional terrorism is part of it. So considering all the nuances of the insurgency, what's also important is that we need to, this Afghanistan has been at war for so many years, so we need to resolve these differences and conflict in a peaceful way. But how does that look like is where is the major challenge. While the U.S. Started, direct negotiations with the Taliban, and they reached a deal in February, I was very much, concerned at that time, because what I believed, and many other, women who are part of our group, is that, even that process could be made more, inclusive and more peace oriented, focusing more on peace as well, so that the next step, which is right now, could have actually already have a lot of responsibilities for end of conflict, right? So if for example Afghans were included in those negotiations, the Taliban would start realizing that, Afghans, they have a state, they have a representation, we have a parliament, for example, and they have their, systems, and people have come together where their voice is very clear that yes, we want to reach to a settlement, but the settlement should not mean we should go back to those times of the Taliban emirate, for example. So that's, I think, And also a responsibility needed to be created on the part of the Taliban that they need to stop killing civilians. In the past 6 months, since February, more than 6 months, we have had more than 4,000 civilian casualties. So many kids have been killed, so many women and children and men have been killed. So what kind of a deal are we talking about if it does not end the bloodshed, or at least decrease the level of the bloodshed? So for the Taliban, they use killing and their terrorist activities as a leverage to make themselves more influential in the peace process and the negotiations. So now that we are it's a very much the beginning. It might take years to reach to any sort of a deal, but from what I already see in the negotiations, the both groups, for example, the Afghan negotiation team that comes from more kind of people's position, and then we have the Taliban. They from the first day they started saying we have to agree on Sharia. Every discussion has to be based on Hanafi Sharia, while Afghanistan is a plural country in terms of sectarian differences. We have Shias, we have, for example, Hindu Sikhs, a number of a percentage of the population. We have, for example, Ismailis, who in the past 20 years has given them the opportunity. Sikhs have their Gurdwara, for example, in Kabul. Ismailis have their open masjids and their mosques. Shias have their mosques, for example. They have all the rights to practice their religion, their sectarian identity, their religious identity very freely. So now the first thing that the Taliban started to discuss is that Hanafi Sharia has to be the leading the major determinant of our issues and our conflicts, and that's where the problem started, because a number of non-Hanafi believers are also in the negotiation team, who start saying, what about us? So it's going to be very, very bumpy road, considering there is this clash of two worlds in a way. The Taliban, who come from the past 20 years, many of them lived in the mountains of the border areas, or in Quetta, for example. Many of them came from Guantanamo, who lived there for 10 years, 20 years. So they haven't actually seen what is this new Afghanistan about. Today, young people, like even the highest mountains of Afghanistan, has access to these cell phones. Like we are able right now sitting here, I can actually talk to somebody in the mountains of Afghanistan. So access to smartphone, to social media, you see this Facebook and Twitter and other social media booming. We had a one TV channel, today we have 74 TV channels. Radios, newspapers, like thousands and thousands of women educated abroad came back. Millions of kids are going to school. So this is a new country with lots of young talent and young power, which the Taliban continue to deny, because for them their whole negotiation from that position where the emirate has to be that point for settlement. And I think that's going to end up the very much problematic area for all of us.
Well, thank you. And I think what one of the things we're interested in, of course, as an organization that supports the education portfolio of the country, is what do you really think is the Taliban's position on girls in education? We hear lots of rumors. Do you think it's hard to know? You've already alluded to this, but what is your intuition on this? We have our own. I have my own, but you being there, we're really curious.
So a reality check is needed. Look at the number of girls' schools that are open in areas where the Taliban have created their control or fear. None. For example, my family comes from Wardak province, and you do not find a single girls' school open in that area. For so many years that the Taliban have continued to have their control. That's one thing. The second thing is the continued attacks on female teachers. So in areas where even the Taliban do not have a direct control, they send these night letters to female teachers that you're not allowed to go out. Zabul, for example, another province in the north and the south, where we had, them coming to even intimidate male teachers. You're not allowed to come. The boys were stopped from coming to boys' school even. So that reality checks makes me very, kind of concerned that what I see on the ground is not doesn't show any change in that behavior. But when the Taliban talk, they say Islamic education. So in there, for them, it's about madrasa. They think that a child can only needs a girl child only needs Islamic education. They need to learn how to read and recite Quran, and that's it. So maybe a couple of years or some years they go to a mosque or to a madrasa, they learn basics of Quran, and that's what they go back home. So there's huge clash in terms of how do they see education and how do Afghans as a country sees education. So that's where the point of clash will start and has already started. And for them, education, and you hear them saying, oh, we have no opposition to education, but when you get into the details, the devil is in the details, because they say it's about the Islamic education only. So they just learn Islamic education, which is just about learning and reading Quran, and that's it.
When you think about the parties at the table, who is going to hold that responsibility of girls' education? Who's there?
We have got a number of very strong women in the negotiation team, but the negotiation team is not the only decision maker in the process. So their role is to negotiate with the Taliban all those terms, and then the idea is that they will come back to the people, they will bring everything that are proposals, and then this will be discussed in a larger kind of a grand assembly, and then you have a national reconciliation council, which has a lot of good people who have been supported. And the thing is that today, no matter how much people are angry about the government, or maybe they have issues with everybody else, when it comes to education, everybody is united. And it's about girls' education, it's about boys' education, everybody. So parents, communities, they are very much united on the stance of education. So I very much believe that once the talks kind of move forward, and I really hope that they do, and we reach to some sort of kind of measurable outcomes, then there will be more pressure coming from the communities. But here, this is what we are also seeing is that this is not just an Afghan's story.
Yes.
While there is I believe it's also about an international level responsibility on how do we remember 2001, when we had 49 countries who came to Afghanistan under this huge umbrella of trying to help Afghanistan, of course under their own national security pretexts, but at the same time the whole idea was that this country will be strong enough so that it will not be used by terrorists as a safe haven. Has that changed after 25 years or 20 years? No. So the responsibility is also very much, I believe, internationally, globally, for all the actors. And that's why we work, with many, like with Congress and the US and many other, countries. For example, letters have been sent to Prime Minister of Canada, for example, to members of the parliament, asking them to endorse their support, that whatever you have invested on in the past 20 years have to be protected. And that's what we are asking you for. And on the other hand, I also think like we have these international laws, right? The national security NAP 13 UNSCR 1325 for women, peace and security. So if we end up in an Afghanistan where the Taliban bring back the emirate, in an era we are talking about implementing feminist foreign policy, we are talking about women, peace and security, then does that mean that these international resolutions, these laws have no value? I think what's going to happen in Afghanistan is going to be a litmus test for the rest of the world. that all we are we going to, have all these different beautiful laws just for, specific countries, or this is for the whole world? If it's for the whole world, then we have to stand united for it.
Yeah, I really like how you position that. It is all of our responsibility, isn't it? It's all of our responsibility. So take us if you can. I appreciate that, and I think your point is very valid. These are going to be long and challenging talks, and they're going to stop and start and stop and start, and there's a lot of other factors affecting them. But at the end of them, what take us what do you envision, what do you hope for you and your family and your children in terms of the outcome of what does Afghanistan look like post peace negotiations?
So there are two scenarios. One is that if the Taliban, for example, have or are like more leverage and more sort of, they get support from the US and other countries, and they end up in a more, powerful position where they would actually, you know assert themselves that, oh, we need to go get back to an interim transition, we need to get back into the Islamic Emirate, for example, then things are very dark. What I'm thinking is that, like, what would happen is that because the Taliban know that once the US starts withdrawing and the international forces leave Afghanistan, for them, being because their only weapon is violence. So when they start killing people, they can easily, take over. So they can actually, that can happen, which is and of course we can go back to those dark times, and I just do not want to envision that further. But the other, scenario that many of us are hoping for and we are asking for is this win-win situation. We are saying that yes, we want the Taliban to come and become part of the society, but how many are they? Are they 35 million? We are 35 million as a nation. So they have to accept what the society is asking them for, what the society is looking like. They can actually, if they want, their own political system, we have elections. Come and run in elections, use all the freedoms that we are using to promote our agenda. You can use media, use all freedom of association, freedom of religion, freedoms that we are using. You can use them all and raise your agenda and your values that you think are important, and see who supports you. If, for example, we have a parliament, if they are, they can run for the parliament, become members of their constituencies, and raise their agendas. And if they can run for the presidential elections, and then we have a constitution change system where that happens through the parliament, and if you have the majority in the parliament, you can. So that's what we are proposing, that it's the same freedoms that we are asking for ourselves, we are proposing to you as well. You can use all these freedoms to promote your agenda, promote your values. If 35 million Afghans end up saying, oh, we want an Islamic Sharia only, then go ahead and you can have that mandate. But what we are asking for is that there's time to use dictatorship, the time to use force, to force people the way you did it 25 years ago or 20 something years ago. That's not acceptable anymore. Because this is a changed country. Huge number of people are more educated. They have seen what freedom looks like, and they have actually mobilized themselves. There is a lot of activism that younger people are engaged in. So that's and if that happens, that's the pathway. Maybe, and that's what pluralistic societies are all about. Maybe they will have some supporters, maybe they will end up in the parliament, maybe they will end up having powers in positions, but what has to happen is that it has to be acceptable to people, rather than just enforcing themselves using all violence and force.
Yeah, I mean, and no violence. The
Exactly.
ceasefire really has to hold.
Yeah.
So, an Afghanistan that is truly democratic, that is
Exactly.
inclusive of all sorts of perspectives,
Exactly.
is your vision. Yeah.
Exactly, and that's what would also stop the international terrorism from
Mm,
finding hosts inside.
yeah.
Right now we have around 20 regional terror groups,
Mm.
from the wars of China to many terrorist groups from Tajikistan, from Uzbekistan, for example. Even we had French, Algerians fighting as part of ISIS in Afghanistan. So all these other terrorist groups find those venues through the Taliban. So if the Taliban are able to absorb themselves into the system, then why not? And then it will also actually close the doors, and it will not allow terrorism to come inside the country.
So you paint a beautiful picture, and I don't know, you can't see yourself right now, but you have the sun
Yes,
shining on
and
your face, and
let's
it
take
really
that as a good omen.
it's a good omen. It really is. We're going to hold that image. We're going to
Yes.
hold that image. So what can we do, Wajma? What can we as Canadians do to support your efforts, to support, we are doing things, but we're working globally, and we're working in an arm's length, frankly, way in Afghanistan at the moment, but we're eager to do more. And we need direction. We need some direction from people like you.
I think anybody who would say that what can they do, they just need to look at these faces of these little girls who go to school, and in those eyes that of these kids that, for example, your organization supports, would actually give you so much hope. And that's what I think it's so important, is that to see what you have already invested in. All these years you have invested in a system, in a support for these younger people. Somebody who went to school just in 2002, for example, she has graduated. Today she might have 2 kids, but she
Yes,
is a literate mother. So
yes.
she knows that she should take, how does she take care of her children. She knows that she wouldn't use violence on her kids. She knows that, for example, when her child gets sick, how to take care of her, to take her to a clinic. And that is, so the mother that today we have after 20 something years or 15 years is a literate mother, is an
Okay.
educated mother. And she would not let her child to be married at the age of 12.
Yes. Yes.
She would actually let her daughter to go to school, and that is the cycle of change that we are talking about. And if we stop that, then what happens to the future generations? And as I was saying before, that when the world started investing in Afghanistan and engaging in Afghanistan, they have put in investments all these years. So how we are going to justify any sort of backing up from where we see that this change has happened, this change is possible. And not just Afghanistan, look at the other countries in the world. Do we just kind of isolate ourselves to our own bubble? And I think COVID proved that we cannot.
Yes.
The world is very much a virus that started somewhere,
It's
already ended up
everywhere.
in the whole world. So we are very much kind of connected with each other, and that connection has been strengthened by these international systems, the UN. So it's a test for an international system of people, that if we are able to continue to support and as well as hold accountable all those people that we have invested in. If we are not able to do that, then I don't think we should have a UN anymore. I don't think we should have all these international systems anymore, because then if we cannot take the responsibility, because that's where we came all together, all these countries, and said, oh, we are together in hard and good days. So I think it's a responsibility. At the same time, it's also about protecting what you have invested in.
Yeah. Yes, I think we see it in the same way, and then it's about how do we influence in our own country and at the international level and in Afghanistan where we
Mm,
can.
mm.
So if you have one key message for us, Canadians, Canadian women and women in Afghanistan, uh, our members, our chapters, the international community, what's that message?
Write to your prime minister about raising his voice, and write to your politicians, for example, asking them to stand up for what you are believing in. Because what's so important is that, for example, Canada is a big donor in Afghanistan. It
Yes.
is support, it's not the military has stopped, but they are a development donor, and then people look at them with a lot of very positive image, because
Mm,
they look at Canada as a partner. Canada
mhm,
has a lot of leverage, being neighbor of the US as well, but at the same time internationally it's a country that's known as a, it has a very beautiful image outside,
mhm,
like it's a democracy, it's a country that believes in human rights, and it's just the way it's a beautiful image that all these greenery that I see here, that
mhm,
beautiful image I've seen back in Afghanistan. So what's important is that, like, asking your government to have its voice louder. You have
mhm.
it's in Canada should be so proud of itself for having the female ambassador
Yes.
who ended up as the UN SRSG, the UN
Mhm,
ambassador.
mhm,
She's a great, role model for so many other, women in the country, and her voice has a lot of importance in this process. So her taking, like, I proposed to her just last week, I said, next time you're talking to the Taliban, take a number of women with yourself,
mhm.
so that they could also have this face to face conversation about what kind of negotiations are we asking for, because the Taliban have denied to talk to women. So I think what I would very much ask everybody is to, like, if you send one letter and 5 people sign in it, it has its voice. If 50 people sign it
Mm,
and say, we are standing with Afghan women, we want every Afghan child to go to school, we want our government to actually hold the government accountable as well, that all the money that goes, it has to go to
mhm.
women and also children, and for a better society. These things have a lot of value in my view.
Okay, that's very helpful, and we're on our way. We're on our way in terms of influence. There's been a lot of distractions to international governments, as you know, and I think I'm also hearing from you the importance of us carrying on in focusing on our education programming,
Of
which we
course,
have every intention of
of
doing.
course. We want more literate mothers, right?
Yes. And we are working in teacher education, and we have our own school, and
Yeah,
yeah, we are very much we're still going to be there along the way, along this journey, and with you. Thank you so much,
thank
Wajma,
you.
for your time today. It's been an inspiring 30 minutes for me. You've given us some clear direction.
Thank
Uh,
you.
keep going,
Thank you.
keep going, and we will be there by your side in our own way. And we look forward to seeing you out there.
Sure. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Take very good care of
You
yourself.
too. Bye.
Okay. Thank you. Bye bye.